Hi Martin.
Hello.
I know that you're working on a book currently, and I was curious to know what are some of the challenges you're facing to get it complete?
Right. Well, initially, the hardest part is knowing what you're going to write about. That probably makes the most sense. But after you've decided the focus that it takes to keep writing, to continue pushing forward on a project, particularly one that you're working on alone, I find that to be quite difficult. And there are, I think, multiple aspects to that.
Well, first of all, I want to actually congratulate you, because this is something that I've been thinking to do, and I haven't been able to do it. So the very fact that you've actually put pen to paper and started on it is a big accomplishment.
Well, thank you.
And that's what I'm curious to know is how did you get started on something that you've always wanted to do?
Well, in this project, it was something that came to me. I mean, this was not something I sort of forced into being. When I was in graduate school, I would daydream and try to distract myself in small ways from all of the rigorous work that I was doing. And over time, I just created a narrative that I found very appealing and found myself sort of thinking about. And by the time I was done, I knew that if I didn't try to write it, that I would be disappointed, that I would feel unfulfilled, because I'd really put a lot of emotional investment into this sort of large story and the characters that were in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think are some of your biggest challenges right now in order for you to finish this project?
The focus is always a challenge, and I think in part that has to do with the avoidance of things that are uncomfortable. The best writing, I feel, and I've been told, comes from the deepest wells of emotion. And what that means is when you have the opportunity to write something that could strike an emotional chord with you, you will probably write something better if you lean into the emotion. But they're not always happy emotions. Sometimes what you're writing about, the chord that it's striking with you, is something that causes a lot of anger or a lot of sorrow. And in those instances, I think the difficulty is that it's painful, it's uncomfortable to purposefully and intentionally go toward an uncomfortable emotion. But that's part of the challenge. And there is ultimately something, at least potentially, very cathartic about going into that emotion and writing through it. The very least, the feelings that you are experiencing as part of that writing process, maybe you can find some peace, some solace at the other end of it.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned emotions, because I think we're all a little bit uncomfortable dealing with certain kind of emotions. But I feel writing is almost like a therapy to oneself, because when we write, we give it more form, we give it more meaning, and we also look at it from a different perspective than we did when we were in that uncomfortable situation. So what do you do in order for you to be able to balance how uncomfortable you are with a particular emotion and also being able to continue expressing yourself?
Well, you have to be willing to experience your emotions fully. You certainly want to be in a space that you can cry if you need to cry, or laugh if you need to laugh.
Right.
And just experience the physical aspect of those emotions. So whether that means writing alone or writing away from people that you know, so that the people who see you are just thinking that you're watching Netflix or something. You need to find the right space, and then the right mental space as well. You need to be able to experience those emotions that are relevant to what you are writing in that time, without being clouded by other emotions, even the good ones. It's hard to write a chapter about loss on a day when your son just got engaged, or when you're excited about a party you're about to go to. It's possible, but that's a discipline.
Right.
You have to work up to that. So initially, when you're starting on a project, I think it's good to dedicate time, dedicate space, dedicate mental clarity to what the current project is. And that's if you have a current project. A lot of great writing just comes
naturally, yeah.
Naturally in the moment, just channeling what you're feeling at that time.
Yeah.
But if what you're writing is a large, encompassing project, like a book, then you need to sort of fit yourself. You need to mold yourself to the trajectory of the narrative, rather than freely writing from your heart in the moment. Otherwise, it's hard to connect the pieces into one consistent story.
And I remember you also said something about focus.
Yes. So the other aspect, I think that pain is a big part of focus. I think the avoidance of pain, the avoidance of discomfort. But there's another part of it, and that is when you're writing and it feels like a chore, or it feels difficult, not because of the emotional aspect, but because you feel no connection to what you're writing in that moment. And I found that can happen often. Even if what you're writing should be a really meaningful or interesting scene or narrative. And I think that we're afraid that what we're writing isn't good enough. We have imposter syndrome, and that we don't think that what we could produce or create will be at a level of our peers, or of the authors that we are aspiring to join, or even to our own internal sense of what's good.
Yeah.
And that voice is something that you absolutely have to quiet. Because the beauty of writing is that editing is just as important, if not more important, as the initial writing. And I found I have produced some beautiful things where there was no beauty in the initial writing, and it was only through the editing process, stepping away and coming back and seeing it with fresh eyes, something that was already on the page that didn't feel so close, that I was able to actually bring some emotion to it, even when I didn't have a lot of emotion to give at the time of my writing.
Right. And I feel you made a really excellent point, and I also feel like asking oneself about the intent as to why they want to write is almost like a very critical part in the whole writing journey, whether you're writing to produce a bestseller, or you're writing for yourself first and then for the others, or you're writing to, please someone.
Yeah.
So figuring out the intent, I feel sometimes is a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, peer pressure comes in, and you kind of wanted an all-rounder book, which is maybe possible, but should that really be the intent to start with? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say are your top 3 tips for someone who's struggling to get started?
Right. I think I'll reiterate on what I've said so far for at least the first 2. One is create the space. Create the space physically, create the time, make yourself open to the emotional landscape if it's a specific project, or try to channel whatever emotions you're feeling in the moment if all you're trying to do is get into the habit of writing. That would be 1. Create the internal and physical space. 2, quiet the voice of fear. Don't be afraid that what you're going to produce isn't going to be any good before it's done. Because you need to start, and then you need to finish the first draft, and then you need to go through the editing and revising process, and then you have a second draft. Maybe your second draft is close to the final version, but maybe not. There is an entire life cycle to the piece that you'll create, during which it can go from whatever or wherever it starts to something that is good or beautiful or worthy or inspiring. Whatever your goal is, there's plenty of time for that to take place. So 2 is, don't be afraid that your writing won't be good. And 3, I would say, lean into those emotions. Lean into the discomfort. If there's a reason why what you're writing is uncomfortable, it's because there's an emotional well that you're not wanting to feel. But those emotions are the ones, some of the ones that help make the most compelling writing, that make the most compelling narratives and help you connect to the people who will be reading what you're writing. And I'll add a 4th. Because a wise person always shares this piece of advice with me. Get an editor. Get someone who is your champion, someone who you can share any level of your writing with comfortably. And it can be your sister, it can be your mom, it can be a friend. It should be someone who is good at editing, doesn't have to be a good writer, but someone who is good and critical but very positive. And the better that they are at it, the better
the result is
the result will be, the better they will help you make the result. You know, you're doing the work, but you need help. Even if you're Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, you need an editor.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very helpful.
My pleasure. Good luck.